Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode 6 of the Enriched podcast. I'm your host, William Richmond. Today, I'm joined by Pam Frank. She is the Senior Vice President at Gable Associates, a boutique consulting firm that specializes in energy, environment, and public utilities. And then she works for a couple other EV organizations as well that we'll dive more into. Pam, thank you for coming on the pod.
Thank you so much. I'm really happy to be here.
Awesome, awesome. So yeah, let's dive into the first question I had. So you built a career at the intersection of energy, environment, and public utilities at Gable Associates. What inspired you to pursue that?
Oh, that's a really good question. It took me a little while to find my groove, but sometime around 1992, I was exposed to climate science. At the time, I was working for a philanthropic organization, a large Jewish community organization in North Jersey.
Mhm.
And my lay president wanted me to get involved in environmental issues. And I had no interest in this at all. I just have to
Yeah.
say that, like, none. Uh, but I had to do it. It was my job. And so I started reading about climate science. And for some reason that I really can't explain even today, it kind of hooked me in.
Mhm.
And so since really that time, my career has been focused around all the things we can do or I can do to help lower carbon.
Mhm.
And that's why I spent 10 years working for a solar company, a startup solar company in the early 2000s
Mhm.
in New Jersey, when that market was just getting started. And when you're in a startup, you have to get involved in everything. So I got
Yeah.
really involved in a lot of policy and stuff. And after that company was sold, I knew I wanted to learn more about the energy markets more than just solar.
Mhm.
And that's why I joined Gable Associates, because Gable has its arms around everything in the energy market,
Yeah.
and it's a much broader base for learning and affecting change.
Gotcha. And so what's something, the average person wouldn't know about going into this field?
That's a really good question. So I think energy is it is probably one of the most highly regulated things on the planet. And
Mhm.
I think, the complexity of of those webs of regulation comes as a shock to a lot of people that kinda come into the field and they're like, "We wanna change things."
Yeah.
And utility jurisdictions, state jurisdictions, regional jurisdictions, federal jurisdictions, and overlapping rules and mazes and authorities that makes it really, really complex.
Yeah.
So I think that's often a surprise to people.
Yeah, for sure. I feel like it's the kind of industry where everyone's trying to get their hands in on, like, the decision-making process with it, and it must be so, like, challenging to get over the hurdles of getting, policies in place and actually, like, making change.
It is. I would say it's hard enough if you just take a look at a state, right? It's hard enough in a state at the state level to
Mhm,
get a law passed, right? Like a lot that goes into the way our systems are designed to make it slow and deliberate
mhm,
and challenging. And that's really hard. But even if you get a law change, like a law passed, I'll give you a great example. Like we worked really hard for 2.5 years to get a major piece of legislation enacted that was a big EV law in New Jersey in 2020 that our governor signed. And that
mhm.
created a whole bunch of new facts on the ground, new incentive programs that didn't exist before, right?
Yeah,
But to get those programs in place, to get them run well, to get them properly budgeted, like after you get a law passed, you can't do a victory lap because then the real work begins.
yeah,
And that's really hard. And that's just impacting one state, right? There's 50 states last time I looked.
yeah,
So it's challenging.
yeah. I know, I'm sure. And so how do you guys kind of so it's described as like a boutique consulting firm. How does that position you guys in the marketplace, and how does that
Yeah.
give you an advantage?
So what's nice about working at Gable is, first of all, it's small. There's under 50 of us, right? I think there's 43
Mhm,
of us. And what makes us a little bit unique is, um, we've got sort of three areas And one of the areas is an area where we're actually in the market representing large customers or aggregate groups of customers,
Hmm.
like a municipality or a county or a large hospital or a university, right? And
Yeah.
so we'll do a bunch of stuff on behalf of those customers, right? Maybe they have a resiliency project. Maybe they have a large solar project. Maybe they want to do a microgrid. Maybe they want to buy green electricity, right? So that's all that sort of falls under one area of the practice. Another area of the practice is policy and regulatory work. I spend a lot of time there. And
Hmm.
what's interesting is because we're often in the market on behalf of customers, we run solicitations and things like this. We're very aware of what's happening in the market, right? Which really helps inform the policy work we do.
Yeah.
And then there's like a third area of practice, which is everything to do with the wholesale electricity market, things that are called regional transmission organizations.
Hmm.
And there's a number of them in the state. The one New Jersey sits in a 13 state group called PJM. Texas has its own, New York has its own, New York ISO, but they've got these all over the country. And those are regulated at the federal level by the Federal Energy Regulatory Committee. We're
Hmm.
involved in that work as well. And again, it's like one hand kind of washes the other. All these sort of areas feed into each other and help us just get smart about what's happening in the market on behalf of our clients. And
Yeah.
then kind of under all those little areas of practice is a pretty sophisticated modeling and analytical group, right? That does fascinating kind of forecasting work and modeling. And some of that stuff is using kind of off the shelf models, some of it's proprietary. So if for instance, I'll give you an example.
Hmm.
If there's a large scale gas plant that's operating in Pennsylvania, and they want to understand what the next few years is going to look like in terms of the market pricing, right? They can ask us to run all kinds of simulations on what the market's going to look like and what the forecasts are, the pricing. So we can do that type of work as well.
Oh,
And
nice.
the fact we can do that work, we can also help inform policy when policy is trying to figure out certain programs, if they're trying to set incentive levels, things of this nature.
Gotcha. Okay. Yeah. So now looking into, some of your work in the EV space, how does your work from Gable kind of complement that?
Oh, so that's a great question too. You're asking good questions here. So what's interesting about electrifying transportation is it is a combination of lots of different areas of practice, right? You've
Hmm.
got transportation policy meets energy policy. It also intersects with like land use policy. You know, how and where are we citing electric charging infrastructure? And are we pairing that infrastructure with distributed generation like solar and batteries? And
Hmm.
how is the fueling, right, of electric transportation going to work in harmony with our grid architecture, the way, electricity is delivered today
Yeah.
into the homes and all the other ways we use it that makes our modern life possible.
Hmm.
So so I've had to spin up pretty quickly on a lot of transportation policy. I've
Hmm.
had to learn things about cars, right? I wasn't a car person. In fact,
Yeah.
I'd never even gone to a car show. All right. The
All
first
right.
car show I ever went to was at the Javits Center in New York in 2015. And,
Hmm.
it's a whole world.
Yeah.
Um, and it's interesting because really all the car is at the end of the day, if you're an energy person, the car is a battery on wheels. It's a pretty
Hmm.
sophisticated battery on wheels. And most of the time, that battery is not propelling a car. Like think about it. If there's 24 hours in a day, how many hours you actually driving? Not that many.
Yeah.
So that means when that car is not on the road, when it's sitting there, that battery has potential uses. And that's where things get interesting.
Oh, interesting. Yeah. So what have you guys kind of thought of with like other practical uses for that battery when you're
All
not
right, I'll
driving?
give you a great example. Everyone loves to use the example of electric school buses because electric school buses are they have a very interesting schedule. The term of art for that is duty cycle, right? So if
Mm-hmm.
you think about a school bus, they run in the morning, they run at the end of the school day, they ferry kids to sports, usually back and forth, right?
Mm-hmm.
They don't get much use in the summertime when school's out. In fact,
Yeah.
usually they're just sitting there sunning themselves in a parking lot somewhere. Now,
Mm-hmm.
think about this. We use a lot of electricity in the summertime for building cooling, right? We have to all condition our space.
Yeah.
So, what if you were able to take those large banks of batteries in school buses that are sitting in a parking lot somewhere, and you're able to charge them up at night from the grid when the cost of electricity is pretty low,
Mm-hmm.
and you discharge them there during the day when the cost of electricity is pretty high. So you're avoiding buying electricity when it's most expensive. There's
Yeah.
other uses, right? You can also, and this starts to get into the weeds, but there's a lot of different markets for electricity depending on the type of electricity customer you are.
Mm-hmm.
If you're a commercial customer, your bill looks different than if you're a residential customer.
Yeah.
And so there's all kinds of ways you can save money as a customer by putting batteries to use for you in a smart way. And it always depends on kind of tariff you're on, which means what kind of a customer are you to the utilities, what's your price schedule look like. And
Mm-hmm.
usually that's sensitive to the time of year. Summer's more expensive than winter,
Mm-hmm.
and the time of day.
Yeah.
Generally speaking, at night, it's pretty inexpensive. Electricity is pretty inexpensive.
Mm-hmm.
Everything, and this is kind of true of life, what drives price is demand. When is demand the highest? Usually in the summertime
Yeah.
when it's really, really hot. Although we have also seen peak demands in the more recent past when it's been really, really cold, when we've gotten those like polar vortexes and deep freezes.
Yeah.
So those are considered, demand events. And if you can lower your use of electricity during those times, you save money for yourself. The system also saves. So there's a lot of good we can do with a lot of batteries that are deployed in smart ways. You've got to make it make sense um, for the people who need those cars to be there when they need to be there. You
Mm-hmm.
can't expect a school bus to sit attached to a building when you need it to pick up kids. So there's a
Yeah.
lot of details, and it really depends on what the duty cycle of these vehicles are.
Mm-hmm.
But there's a lot of interesting things. The one that people really like, and it was in the Ford commercial during a Super Bowl a few years ago, the F-150 Lightning.
Mm-hmm.
Um, they sort of stepped forward and said, your truck can back up your house. And people love this idea, right? So instead of having a generator that
Oh, yeah.
requires fuel, you
Mm-hmm.
just basically run the battery of the truck or the car to power your house when the grid goes down.
Wow.
People love that.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah, it's very interesting. My dad has the Mach E, which he's a big fan of. I mean, it's a great car, but
It is a
I
great
will.
car, and every vehicle now, every electric vehicle coming out is going to have this capability. It's called bidirectional, right? You can either suck electricity from the grid to charge your car, or you can
Mm-hmm.
push it back out to your home or your building, or even out to the grid itself, right? So some
Yeah.
people will say, "Oh, I'll sell, electricity to the grid." Well, not so fast, right? You need permission to do that. There's a lot of regulation. We're not quite there yet.
Yeah.
But we are in a place where you can hook your car up to power your home.
Wow. Yeah, and I mean that would come in handy so much in Montana, especially when we have those really rough Arctic fronts where it's,
Yeah.
sometimes 0 degrees below zero. It's yeah. So that would be huge. But with EVs, are they actually as advantageous as people think? Because I've heard that the e-waste from those batteries is actually pretty detrimental to the environment. Or is that
Yeah.
kind
So
of a
there's
misconception?
Yeah, that's a misconception. So first, I think we have to start off by saying there's no free lunch, right? There's always going to be waste. Always going to be waste. What you
Yeah.
try to do is minimize it, and if you can design circular systems that basically they take what was waste and they refine it and turn it into feedstock for new product, right? And that's
Mhm.
happening today. There are companies like Redwood and New Energy that's actually out of my state in New Jersey that are taking batteries, everything from car batteries to the batteries in your cell phone, right? And
Hmm.
they're basically taking the high value elements out of that and being able to recycle them and reuse them for new batteries. And that's really
Wow.
valuable. That also means less mining. Like, we're going to have to mine for
Hmm.
minerals. And to be fair, there is a lot changing in terms of the research and development with battery and battery chemistry.
Hmm.
So, right now, lithium ion is very dominant in cars. That's not, I, that is going to change, right? I mean, that's
Yeah.
the chemistry today that's ruling, but there's so much money and innovation in this space. And so that's going to change pretty quickly over the next 10 years, I expect.
Hmm.
And with that, to the extent you can be designing these closed loop systems from the very beginning, you're going to minimize the waste. But there's no toxin. It's not like you're not a lithium ion battery doesn't have lead in it, right?
Yeah.
So it's a little bit of a misnomer when people start talking about toxic elements of batteries. You don't want them in landfills. They're
For
too
sure.
valuable, right? The other thing about them is they have second lives. So just because a battery isn't, just because a car gets turned in with a battery that may not, be very desirable for that car, that battery could be put to second and even third uses. It could be used in the grid. It could potentially be used as backup power for a
Hmm.
building. So there's a lot of uses for the batteries, and that's going to become a whole industry of it in and of itself.
Yeah. And how much have you guys kind of shifted your focus to that second and third uses of these batteries?
Um, we haven't done a lot of work in that area yet, quite frankly. And what some of my colleagues tell me that are working in companies that are refurbishing and repurposing these batteries and these elements, they're saying, hey, that second and third use may not happen because it's going to be more valuable. The economics are going to be better to take
Hmm.
those batteries, break them down, and create new ones from those materials. So we'll see how that shakes out.
Gotcha. Yeah, it just seems like it's a relatively new idea that you can have these second and third uses. So I feel like there's a huge market to capture there. But I
Well,
mean, there's a huge market with EVs in general. It's
there
still very new.
is. And I mean, and you start to think about, like, I was listening to something on the news today as I was driving here about what's going on in Ukraine with drones and drone manufacturing in Ukraine.
Hmm.
So Ukraine was buying drones, and then they basically, it was a problem of finding spare parts, and if it wasn't working well, and now they're building their own drones. They're literally, and by the way, when I say drones, I don't mean like little objects flying.
Yeah.
Some of the drones that I heard described today were basically cars, remote controlled from
Yeah.
long distances that can bring injured soldiers out of an area, right? So
Wow.
you
Yeah.
start to think about, when you think about component parts and recycling, and you start to think about like the global south, which gets all of our old, used, dirty cars, and they have
Hmm.
horrible air pollution down there as a result of it.
Yeah.
You start to think about, well, what kind of entrepreneurship could you bring to regions of the world like that, where they can actually start recycling and building ways to get around with battery components, right? And do
Mhm.
some innovative things, from the ground up. It made me think about that today because, there's a lot of places in the world that, their economies are way behind where we are, and
Yeah.
they have a lot of freedom to create a whole new reality in terms of their transportation models.
Yeah. Oh, it's fascinating, and I'm curious to see kind of where we head with air travel too.
It's not a crazy thought. In fact, I was speaking to some folks out of Michigan that do a lot of work in this sort of three-dimensional space. And I know there's companies that are really interested in being able to do, these hops from New Jersey to New York, right, over the Hudson,
Hmm.
avoid avoid the pavement,
Yeah.
so that technology, again, the regulations that lagging behind it. But when you start to think about where storage takes us, I mean, I think the reason that I became so interested in electric vehicles, it was always about storage,
Hmm.
because storage is so strategic. Like, think about any commodity you can imagine, there's usually a place to store it,
Yeah.
right? Electricity is not like that. The second it is created, it must be consumed. And there's a whole market and a whole bunch of software and energy devoted to balancing our grid so that happens. The minute
Hmm.
electricity is created, it is consumed somewhere in the system. And that
Yeah.
system always has to stay balanced between demand and load. So now, for the first time ever since we started using electricity,
Hmm.
we're inventing storage. That's massively disruptive
Yeah.
in a good way, because I think it can really save um, a lot of inefficiencies in the system.
Hmm.
It's good.
Yeah. No, and I've seen something, where was it? I want to say Japan, where they had roads that actually actively charge the vehicle while they're driving.
Yeah, so they're doing this. They're doing some pilots in Europe, in Israel. I hadn't seen the one in Japan, where they're using the friction, right? That's
Hmm.
happening between the tires and the road to generate electricity, right?
Yeah.
That's fascinating. I mean, it's a kind of another interesting thought experiment to say, what do we do? We've got all these roads, right? Like, what if these roads were smart roads? What if we added intelligence into these roads? What if we use these roads to move water, to move electricity, and to carry information,
Hmm.
right? In other words, imagine driving down a road and you get an alert that there's a deer a mile ahead, like in the road, right? Because
Yeah.
the street itself, the road itself, is actually now has all this intelligence that it never carried. That could also be like a massive public works project, which would be really interesting from a job creation perspective, right?
Yeah.
So this infrastructure idea and the idea of transportation coming together with energy, it opens up a lot of different ways of thinking.
Yeah. No, it's crazy. I was, debating getting an EV when I came out here to LA just because they're everywhere. They're literally everywhere. There's charging stations everywhere within like a mile of me. And I didn't end up doing it only because I just I don't know. It's so efficient to just fill up real quick for like a couple minutes at a gas station. And
Well, it's a
it sounds
mindset.
selfish, but yeah.
It's a mindset. I mean, to be honest, there's a great used EV market. There's a lot of value in a used EV.
Hmm.
So it's something that you should pay attention to. And, you're pretty motivated out there given the price of gasoline, which
Yeah.
is ridiculously high.
Hmm.
So it helps the economics pencil out nicely. One of the challenges is for people that live in cities or any kind of high density housing.
Hmm.
One of the big challenges is, how do you give people like that access to routine charging? And I say routine charging, what I mean is, where does your car sleep at night, right? Where does it spend a lot of its time?
Hmm.
It's going to be the most efficient and least expensive and better for the grid to charge overnight,
Yeah.
slowly, right? You don't need a quick charge, right? You have 8 to 10 hours before you have to take it anywhere, right? So it can charge slowly, which is better for the grid and better for the battery. But
Hmm.
if you live in an apartment complex, there's a lot of challenges with getting charging infrastructure into those complexes. And there's
Yeah.
1,000 reasons why it's not happening.
Hmm.
It happens in some cases and not in others. And one of the ways we address that is also by building a system of fast charging. So for some people, the way they're going to fill up is a fast charge once a week, or they'll go to the supermarket, they'll plug in there, and
Yeah.
they'll get 50 miles, while they're. So there's a lot of different strategies for folks that live in high density environments, but I do know a lot of people that haven't purchased an EV yet because of that issue, because they don't have a place to charge it at night.
Yeah. And I think that's, based on what you're saying about the cost discrepancy between charging at night and during the day. I think that's definitely a big deterrent for people. And
And that's
it's
not fair, right?
yeah.
Like, my way to solve that, right, as an example, would be um, that we need to create, if somebody lives in an apartment complex, right, especially if it's affordable housing or they're on
Hmm.
some government assistance, right, they should have a card that they can swipe at a public charging station that gives them lower rates,
Yeah.
right? Like, it's kind of a subsidy, because it's not their fault that they're living in a high density environment, right? So
Mhm.
you do have to think a little bit about, because there's some equity issues here. But a lot of it has to do with the way the energy markets and tariffs have been traditionally set up. They weren't set up to fuel autos.
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting. Fuck. I I was gonna get that what was it, the Bolt
That's
EV. I
what I
remember.
have. I gave it to Max because I'm on my second EV. It's a great car.
Yeah, but like also my hesitancy with that was it got discontinued. So like what was the whole deal with that?
Well, it's coming out again, new and
Okay.
improved. And so is the Leaf also probably next year. It just was supposed to be available now, but now I'm hearing early next year. I have a
Hmm.
feeling Japan is waiting to see if there'll be any tariff um, softening
Yeah.
because as much as prices on electric vehicles have come down, and they have, I mean, there's really good news there.
Hmm.
It used to be that generally speaking, the premium for an electric vehicle is about $10,000 to $15,000. Meaning, if you have an identical ICE vehicle, internal combustion engine vehicle, you're going to pay $15,000 more for that version of it with a battery.
Hmm.
That's really come down significantly. Like there's almost cost parity, and now we
Yeah.
have the tariffs.
Oh yeah.
And at the end of this month, the federal tax credit,
Hmm.
which was a nice help for certain cars, will go
Hmm.
away as well.
Oh wow, yeah.
Yeah.
That's huge. Cause yeah, that was a I think $7,500 tax credit, right?
Yes, but it was only available to certain cars that were made here. It was pretty restricted. There was a
Hmm.
loophole with leases. Um, and it's just going to be interesting to see what the car companies do, right, in reaction to tariffs and this, right? Because they have a couple of options, right? They can hold prices steady, try to get more market share and kind of risk profitability, or they
Hmm.
can raise prices and pass all that on to the consumer. So it remains to be seen what you're going to do. I mean, it's a very, very, very competitive market. If you've
Yeah.
ever bought a car, which you sound like you have, you know
Hmm.
what that looks like. It's pretty cutthroat and competitive.
Yeah. Yeah, and I mean it's just interesting because, obviously gases or oil is a huge export of ours. So at what point do we, kind of disregard that and move towards a more electric centric, transportation model, even if it will take time to, see that profitability and like, how do we balance the profitability versus the eco-friendly aspect of EVs?
Well, I would say, and I care a lot about the environment, right? But I know from like my whole career, you're not moving markets based on people's care for the environment. It's
Yeah.
just not how we're wired, right?
Yeah.
We have to make something that is better than the incumbent and at or below the cost of it. Period. Or people aren't going to even look at it in a way that would move a market. And
Yeah.
so it's really, really, really. And by the way, the technology, you know this because you've been in your dad's car. The technology is superb. It's so much better than the IC engine, like in
Yeah.
every way. But it has to be able to compete with the convenience of the IC engine vehicle. And there's a lot of consumer education to be done. But here's the interesting thing. I find that once people spend a few days with an electric vehicle, they get it. It's like all their range anxiety, they just figure it out. And they're like, oh, what was I worried about? It's easy.
Yeah.
That's how it is for most everybody. So I always say, if you have an option when you're traveling to rent an EV, in a place where there's charging infrastructure, you're not in the middle of the country going on really long trips, right? But
Yeah.
you're in an environment where you can easily find charging infrastructure. Rent an EV and have an experience with it because
Hmm.
they're really, really, really fun to drive.
Yeah.
And you're going to figure it out pretty quickly. And then you'll be like, oh, this is going to be my next car.
Yeah. No, I had a lot of fun with Uncle Michael's Tesla. I remember taking it around LBI. And, I think in regards to like areas where my parents live, since the infrastructure is not in place there in large quantities, there is, definitely a hesitancy for people to switch over to EVs because being in Missoula, Montana, how much access do you have to those stations? Like, what?
Well, remember something. 90% of the trips you take, 90%, are under 40 miles. That's true for
Yeah.
most people in this country, right?
Yeah.
So on the bigger trips, and that means you can always fuel out of your home if you know, have a place, which your dad does, right? And in
Yeah.
fact, I recorded him up at the lake
Hmm.
talking about how he uses his car and how he doesn't have to worry about the range. And he's going Flathead to Missoula, home, and he's fine.
Yeah.
So, but I agree. A lot of people in Montana, first of all, they need big trucks. They're lugging a lot of equipment.
Yeah.
When you lug equipment, it's weight, and that basically decreases the battery efficiency. That hurts your range, right? So,
Hmm.
as the battery chemistry gets better, and as the ranges improve, you'll see that segment adopt as well.
Yeah. It's yeah, that's a good point because I feel like the practicality of it in a place like Montana with people who are avid hunters, fishers,
Yeah.
and they do need to lug all their equipment. They,
And if
you
you're
know,
towing an RV, like, you can't, like, you've got to make it work for the use case where you're towing in an RV, right? You can't get 100 miles of range
yeah.
and be content with that, right? Towing an RV. So again, that's where we're going to see the technology evolve, and you'll find applications like that are going to happen.
Hmm. So do you see it? I mean, I feel like it only makes sense for us to perfect it in these rural or not these urban areas like LA, tri-state area, places like that before we worry about, the uses in rural areas.
Yeah, they're the harder ones, right? But I think that there's a number of companies that are working to solve that problem, and I think we're going to see some really exciting things. I know Rivian has a really interesting product coming out next
Hmm.
year, and there are some luxury vehicles. You know, it's interesting, right? People get very excited, right? If somebody reveals a car, and the car has 500 miles of range, right?
Hmm.
And I scratch my head a little bit and I say, look, human biology is such that you're not driving 500 miles. You're going to have to stop probably at 250 miles to go to the bathroom. That's
Yeah.
just reality, right? And if we do our job with the charging infrastructure, you're going to make filling up is going to be as simple as plugging in, going to the bathroom, coming out, and you got enough to get where you're going.
Hmm.
Um, and so in some ways, I always say, don't be fooled, because you're going to pay a lot of money for a battery that's capable of going 500 miles when I'm not sure you need it.
Yeah. Yeah, that's true. Because I know my dad gets like 300-mile range, something around there. And I mean, that gets him anywhere he needs to go,
Yeah,
especially having the luxury of having.
250, 300, and it'll go down in the winter when it's cold, because batteries perform better in like 70, 80-degree weather.
Hmm.
But 250, 300 miles for most people is more than enough, again, especially when they're only going 40 miles a day.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. So what are some of like the biggest barriers you're seeing, working with Charge EVC as for widespread adoption of EVs?
Well, I'm just going to say there's three main barriers that we know.
Hmm.
One is vehicle affordability, and
Yep.
that's coming down and moving in the right direction. The other is consumer education. People don't know, and they have range anxiety when it's not warranted, and that prevents them from trying the car. And what's my third? Range anxiety, consumer education, price, and oh yeah, and the third is probably the biggest challenge of them all,
Hmm.
which is the grid, right? What I'll
Yeah.
call grid readiness. So it's one thing to plug in my car at my house. It's another thing to plug in a fleet of trucks, right? Where you may need megawatts of power. And the
Hmm.
constraint to fleet owners adopting these vehicles, there's a lot of interest, but the grid right now and the readiness of the grid is a choke point. It's the one I'm most concerned about,
Hmm.
because I can educate consumers. The prices are coming down. That's just the market working. The grid readiness one is okay, how we started this conversation. There's 50 states, multiple jurisdictions, lots of ways the grid is regulated. Is it
Yeah.
wholesale? Is it retail? Is it the utility jurisdiction? I mean, it's really complicated. And so how we do these upgrades, grid readiness projects, who pays for them, how long do they take? I mean, right now, if you go to the utility and you say, I need 20 megawatts of power, they kind of laugh at you and say, get in the back of the line. Like, it's not going to happen.
Yeah.
We need to solve this problem.
Hmm.
So that's the biggest challenge in my mind right now, the grid.
Yeah. But yeah, I just feel like with how kind of split we are on the idea of EVs versus, the gas guzzlers, finding a way to educate the people that are, attached to their diesel trucks or whatever is going to be so hard because that's all they know. And, some people are so stuck in their ways that like they're not willing to look into, other alternatives that may benefit society in the long run because they're just
Well, I
focused
think the
on.
best way to do that. So I'm on the board of Plug in America, which is a good organization to look at. It's a national group, and they're really the in the interest of the driver. Been
Hmm.
doing work for years, and it, it, we're doing actually a lot more education in rural areas in the country. And
Hmm.
what's interesting is, I think if you approach people where they are, you offer them test drives. And there are trusted messengers, right? So it's not like some East Coast yuppie trying to talk some Texas guy into a truck, right? An
Hmm.
electric truck. It's somebody from Texas who that truck driver trusts and knows, talking to him and saying, "Drive it and see what you think," right? So it's how you approach the conversations with people always. I don't think this is there should never be a should in the conversation. You should drive this, you should do that. I think it's
Yeah.
a openness to experience it,
Yeah.
see if it works for you.
Hmm.
I think a lot of times it works for people, and they just have to be open to trying it.
Yeah. No, I 100% agree. And where do you see like the biggest growth opportunities in the EV space? Like what kind of vehicles? I know we mentioned trucks, but that comes with its own challenges with having to lug, pounds of equipment that can really decrease the efficiency. So which kind of vehicle or, sector
Wow.
of
I
that
don't
space?
know. I don't know that I have one answer. We haven't talked at all about autonomous vehicles and their role in all of this.
Hmm.
Um, it's probably worth, also thinking about that and how they start to work in our system. Because we're seeing areas of the country where they work really, really well when it's just autonomous vehicles on the road. Where things get
Hmm.
squirrely is when autonomous vehicles have to coexist with human drivers.
Yeah.
That's a whole area that needs to be addressed.
Hmm.
Um, I think there's also what I'll call micromobility options in urban areas that I'm really interested in seeing how they grow, because that also could be used in developing countries. So, as an
Hmm.
example, I was in New York twice this week for Climate Week, right? And the New York I'm in today is very different than the New York I worked in the late 80s, right? You couldn't
Yeah.
even find a place to sit down in the late 80s. I would sit my butt on wet grass in Bryant Park, and it wasn't a safe place. Today,
Hmm.
streets are all closed off. There's parks, there's pedestrian areas, and there's bike lanes, and there's bikers all over Manhattan.
Hmm.
And not just delivery people actually using bikes to move instead of the subways, instead of the buses, or instead of their feet.
Yeah.
And so even when you think about shore communities, like down at the Jersey Shore where I am right now, right?
Hmm.
You could imagine getting around to everything you need here without necessarily a very large vehicle. You could maybe use like a golf cart or a three-wheeler. Like, there are different micro mobility options, and also the ones that augment, and this is really an important area,
Hmm.
that augment public transportation. So part of the issue is buses don't take everybody where they need to go. In fact, they rarely get you exactly to where you need to go. But that last mile or two could be helped with micromobility solutions. So I think there's going to be I see it, a lot of application there for vehicles that are maybe smaller, more compact, that operate in urban areas.
Mm-hmm.
And by the way, think about this, right? If we have fewer cars, but they're operating more frequently because they're shared or they're autonomous, right? So instead of sitting in a driveway, 20 hours of the 24 hours,
Mm-hmm.
that car is actually used 24 hours a day by someone somewhere, right?
Yeah,
That means we need a lot less parking.
that's true. Yeah.
And if you just think about how we use like land today and how much ugly parking exists, like if we
Mm-hmm.
could get rid of parking lots, that's a big deal too. So that's
Yeah.
why when we were starting this conversation, I said, electrifying transportation really does, it's energy policy, it's transportation policy, it's also land use policy.
Yeah.
You could build, as an example, a high-rise building. And typically, if you build a high-rise apartment building, you are required to have a certain number of parking spots. But
Mm-hmm.
if you offered that high-rise building and you said to the people who live in that high-rise building, as part of living here, you will have transportation on demand, meaning you can use a car, you can check out a car anytime you need, for whatever you need. So you don't have
Mm-hmm.
to own a car anymore, right?
Yeah.
And then that building owner does not need to build a parking deck.
Mm-hmm.
So that's
Oh,
actually something that exists in Jersey City. And it
okay.
exists in certain places in California. It's a different kind of a model, but it's something that um, housing developers and apartment complexes and condos and things like this are developing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, being in LA, I've seen the rapid, implementation of the Waymo vehicles. I'm sure you're pretty familiar with those.
Yeah,
They're honestly pretty great. Like, they're not the most aggressive on the road, but that's not what you're looking for. You're looking to get from point A to point B with
I love those.
100% certainty you'll be safe.
Yeah,
And I mean, I've taken them numerous times now, and they're great. I
they're
mean,
very pleasant.
yeah. And the technology there is great, but there's still, some work to be done in terms of getting them on the interstate and stuff like that. But I know,
Yeah, and maybe you don't need them for the interstate, right? Like,
yeah.
eh, they could do fine, working in sort of within the city perimeters too.
Hmm.
But the other way you have to start to think about these things is it you know if we take the driver out of the car, right,
Hmm.
and we're just talking about things that move, right, you can now even think about a doctor's office, right, that literally comes to people's homes, right.
Yeah.
You see this with like pet groomers.
Hmm.
They have like groomers that come to people's homes, and they
Yeah.
have all the grooming things on the truck.
Hmm.
Well, you can actually now, again, start to think about these different services, especially for elderly folks that have a hard time moving around,
Hmm.
right? Where services come to them.
Yeah. No, I mean, all these points you're making are going to increase the efficiency of people's everyday lives in ways they couldn't have thought of because, we're so used to having, our own vehicle and having it ready at our disposal, but that can be mimicked with EVs. Like you were saying, where you would have on-demand transportation for people living in, these high-rise developments. So I think there is definitely, something to consider there, and it's
Who wants
something.
to own a vehicle? Do you know how much? Well, I don't know how much you pay to park a car in Santa Monica,
Yeah.
but really, like, if you didn't have to own a car in a city and you could just have a car whenever you needed a car,
Yeah.
it's at a reasonably low cost to do it. There's a lot of people that make that choice because they don't want to be bothered with car ownership or the hassle of car ownership. And that's
Yeah.
why you have things like, these, what are they called? The the car share services that
Ride share. Yeah.
you can use in cities. They're great.
They are great. I will say the pricing can be a little outrageous sometimes. They have like these surge prices, at very when I'm trying to get it from like an airport, like from LAX airport, sometimes it's $50 to get 10 miles or wherever just because
Yep.
it's in such high demand, like everyone's trying to get them. So I think with these autonomous vehicles, there could be a great opportunity for them to disrupt the market there.
Oh, I mean, Yeah, but it is really challenging right now. Again, just given getting them to work alongside dumb humans is really
Yeah.
hard.
Yeah. No, and that's
I think they're best for closed campuses right now, like, kind of these closed areas, closed off areas where you're just running them is
mhm.
probably a great place to perfect them.
Yeah. And then gradually build their way out. Well, I know Elon is trying to do something with the robo taxi, right? Like kind of that would be able to function on the interstate and highways.
It's a big priority for Tesla. They have two big things. They have, their whole autonomous piece, and then they have the semi, which is a big, big truck,
Hmm.
tractor trailer truck that's coming out soon. And everybody is very, very excited about that semi.
Yeah. And that can, I mean, if that is able to get on the interstate, that's going to disrupt the market entirely. Because I think
Oh,
that's
yeah.
everyone's big, hesitation, I guess, with the autonomous vehicles. Because especially here in LA, where it's a lot of the driving is dominated by interstate driving, where you're bumper to bumper for, hours on end sometimes, having that, autonomous vehicle where you can just be in the passenger seat or back seat,
Yeah.
knowing, you're going to get where you need to go for a reasonable price without having to
Yeah.
drive is pretty great.
Yeah, it's pretty liberating. I mean, the other thing too that we didn't talk about, but it's a huge issue, is these trucks, these big trucks, and electrifying them, getting rid of the tailpipe, right, of these trucks,
Hmm.
is a really big deal because of the health impacts. So those big trucks are powered by diesel, and even though there's not a lot of carbon emitted with diesel trucks, they spew out particulate matter,
Yeah.
PM 2.5, and then other things. But we're just starting to understand how bad that particulate matter is for your health. And it's not just lung health, it's cardio, it's like systemic. And there are people, like one example in New Jersey is the Port Authority in New Jersey. I'm sure
Hmm.
you are familiar with it, having lived in New Jersey. And it's the second busiest port in the country, right? And the neighborhoods that surround that port, you're 4 times more likely to get asthma than anyone else in the state
Oh,
because you're
geez.
literally living in toxic soup.
Hmm.
And if you could, and what's interesting about that market, it's probably one of the most dense transportation markets in the world, which means the trucks take the stuff off the boat. They only drive about 100 miles to their target and then they go back. And
Hmm.
that 100 miles is totally doable with technology today. It's different in California where trucks have to drive like 300 miles, right? But
Yeah.
in our area of the country, it's 100 miles, which is
Hmm.
completely doable. And if you ask me why we haven't done much more of this in the port area, it's mostly the grid and the availability of these large, they're called class 8 trucks, and that's one of the things that Tesla is looking to disrupt pretty significantly. So we'll see. We'll wait and see.
Hmm. So yes, I mean, essentially, this what I'm gathering is this grid technology is the skeleton for this, human-like system, and we need to get that in place, and then everything else will be able to work efficiently. We'll gradually be able to, do all these things you're saying, and
You make it sound very easy. Yes.
it's obviously, yeah, no, obviously, it's way more complex than I'm describing, but it's just a human-like analogy, I guess, to it. But
Yeah. Yeah.
no, and trust me, I've really considered getting an EV because I told my mom this could be, a good thing to have because there are incentives that are, are now going to be out the window. But
California still has them. So you still
okay.
have state incentives. And if you get serious about it again or think about it again,
Hmm.
we'll have a conversation.
Yeah. And you'll be out here soon, right, for a conference?
Well, in fact, I realize I'm coming out twice.
Hmm.
I am coming out in November, the week before Thanksgiving, but
Okay.
now I'm also coming out the week of October 6th.
Oh, okay. So
So
literally
I'll
in
let
the
you know
next
when I
weeks.
nail my plans because I think I'm going to be in LA for like the whole week that week.
Gotcha. Yeah, I'd be interested to learn more about all these EVs, and I don't know what the availability is to attend just like a little bit of one of these conferences, but that would be very interesting.
So I don't know if there's anything happening in November, but I'll find out. It's funny. I asked my Plug in America folks um, if there is anything going on when I'm out there. So I'll let you know. I will.
Hmm.
It's a really interesting space.
Yeah, definitely. And I guess just to wrap it all up, what lessons have you learned while working in such like a fast evolving sector, being in these leadership positions?
Well, the one I learn over and over and over and over again is that it's always in my mind, especially when you're dealing with policy and regulatory world and trying to change things. I feel like a lot of it is about building relationships and trust and coming with good information,
Hmm.
right? It's and it's hard to get people's attention.
Yeah.
I think it's interesting. Cars, and I was in solar, right? So when I was in solar for 10 years, we got a lot of love. We got a lot of attention from the state in terms of the policy and regulatory work. And
Hmm.
my friends that worked in energy efficiency were always struggling. And I used to say, well, solar's sexy.
Hmm.
The cars are sexy, right? People love their cars, right?
Yeah.
So that was kind of another interesting thing I learned too, is that like it kind of depends on what the thing is, right? Because you can get
Hmm.
a lot of people's attention about a car. It's a lot harder for me to get people's attention about the grid,
Yeah.
right? And most people, they don't care. They want to be able to plug something in and have it work. And they don't want to feel like when they pay their utility bill, they're being like raped and robbed.
Yeah.
Beyond that, leave me alone, right? No, people don't want to get too involved. And so I think one hard lesson for me has been the whole realm of how this stuff gets regulated
Hmm.
is I feel like we can always do so much better. And part of it has to do with the fact that it's so niche and people talk in their own special vocabulary and they don't kind of make it translatable for everyday folks.
Hmm.
And I feel like there's a lot more we could do. It's hard, but there's a lot more we could do to engage the public
Yeah.
so that the politicians and the policymakers and the regulators feel a little bit more comfortable taking the steps they need to take to make this all work.
Yeah.
I've worked around politicians most of my life, and I'm not going to say that there aren't exceptions, but most of these folks are not heroes, right? They're not getting out in front of the people that voted for them.
Yeah.
Some of them will, but it's rare, and
Hmm.
and they need the cover of an educated constituency.
Hmm.
So how do you do that? How do you make this stuff interesting and fun? And I mean, that's why I'm glad you wanted to have a conversation about it, right? How do you make it engaging for people?
Yeah.
You know, and it's easier when it's a car.
Yeah. It's difficult when you describe, the grid, like you're saying, because it's not a very appealing topic to people. They don't want to know the nooks and crannies of everything. They just want efficiency and affordability.
Yeah, I would say that the other big lesson for me is to, especially again, when you're dealing in sort of the regulatory realm and trying to change things, that
Hmm.
you always have to keep your eyes open for the opportunities because things happen every day you get up and it's a different set of facts in front of you. And
Hmm.
things happen sometimes that are very unpredictable. And you just have to know enough to be able to pounce when the time is right. So
Yeah.
that's kind of a good lesson.
Yeah. No, and the point you made about relationships is something is a common trend I'm noticing throughout all my interviews. Like being able to, connect with people on a personal level before you try to sell them on what you're trying to get accomplished is vital. Because if you just dive right into it, people aren't going to take you seriously.
No, and they won't listen. I mean, it's amazing how many conversations people have and no one's listening on the other side. And they
Yeah.
don't even realize that no one's listening, right? Like they're just talking at them and that's not communicating. So,
Yeah. No, yeah. This was great though. Thank you so much for taking time out of, your vacation at the Bay in
my
LBI.
vacation weekend. Well, I appreciate the conversation. It was a good conversation and you asked really good questions.
Thank you. Yeah. And at the end of the day, it's something I still want to learn a ton more about because, there is a part of me that really is considering making that switch, and I just want to find
Okay.
a good time financially for me to do so.
Okay.
Yeah,
And you get spun up on it, and then you can talk to other people about it too.
exactly. Well, thank you, Aunt Pammy. I appreciate it. And
Yeah, a pleasure. Have a good night.
yeah, I'll see you soon in LA.
Okay. Bye.
Bye-bye.
If perfect is as perfect as, then I'll never say no to anything or anyone. If perfect is as perfect as, let this valley take me home.